Hi, everyone, and welcome back to the Nonprofit Productivity Show. And we have a special guest again today. He is an executive, he's an author, he's an expert in productivity. What else would you expect from this podcast and this show? His name is Sean Hogue. He's the author of Peaceful Productivity. When I saw that title, it just caught my eye. I mean, it's not just the alliteration, but it made me curious. It made me want to get to know this author and be able to put his book in front of you. So, Sean, thanks so much for being our guest today. You're joining us from the road, which tells us you really are a productive executive. And what would you like folks to find out more about you personally and professionally?
Yeah, well, thank you, Michael, and thanks for having me on board. I was really looking forward to this one, and I'm glad we could make it happen. Um, I guess just a little background about myself. I'm a master mariner. I'm a ship's captain. I worked in the kind of offshore energy sector for many years, sailing internationally. And I came ashore. I made the move ashore about 10 years ago into marine surveying, which has then since morphed into a leadership position inside a marine consulting and an engineering company. So that's a little bit of my professional background.
So, what was the pivot, Sean, in terms of productivity? And we'll make sure we put the links to your website on in the show notes. And it gave me a little sense of kind of this pivot. But you've managed to keep this through line. You've always been productive in your career. But what led you to jump in and say, I want to write a whole book about productivity?
Um, I've always been a big reader in the self-development space, personal development, um, time management, and over the years, I've developed these systems for myself because I do stay pretty busy. And working at sea for so many years taught me a couple of lessons about just getting things done that really relate to having an appropriate structure in place, the power of routines. You know, when you sail offshore on a ship, every day essentially looks like every other day. It's very regimented as far as your time goes. For the couple of years preceding, I guess last year, I was working on my MBA. I spent 2 years doing that at 5 in the morning outside of working hours. And when that whole thing was finished, I stopped and said, well, geez, now what, you know? And having been a big reader, I've also been writing online. I write for magazines, things like this.
So tell us about the title. I mean, we hear a lot about hustle culture today. We hear a lot about, got to do all the things, got to be in all the places online. Why peaceful productivity? And what's kind of the nugget of that?
I like to think about things holistically. I think a lot of productivity advice or a lot of advice in that space obviously focuses on the work of the day, the work that you do, your list of three most important tasks and things of this nature. And to me, it's really about achieving a balance. You hate to use the words, work-life balance, but it's about how you go about achieving a balance and structuring your day in such a way that you're getting done the things that you want to do with a full understanding of the time that you have available, so that you are appropriately committed, but not overcommitted. You're not rushing from one thing to the next because it's really as much about subtraction as it is about addition,
Mm.
if that makes sense.
Oh my gosh, I love that. And, some of the great mystics throughout history have said, really when you get to a place of wholeness, you're, like you said, you're taking things away. It's not so much that you're adding things. Um, if there's one or two big takeaways, besides this idea of putting things in their place within your life, what would those other big takeaways be?
I would say that conceptually, the the book is almost more um, about my life philosophy, kind of cloaked in the verbiage of productivity. I strongly believe that you only have a couple of resources, true resources in your life, and that's your time and that's your attention. And I also believe that everything that you do in life is can be defined as a task, right? Currently, I'm engaged in the task of driving across country back home. Mowing your lawn is a task. Um, a large project such as building a ship or a bridge is really just an interconnected series of tasks. All tasks take time to complete. And the more attention that you can focus on the task during the time that you're working to complete it, the faster and the better that the task will be done. So when you consider life through that lens, um, I further feel that you then spend all of your time kind of in one of these five main buckets. I call them the big five categories. And that's your personal time, there's your professional time. The third category, I call it life, which is kind of consists of two parts. The first being your interpersonal relationships, and the second being what I call maintenance, which is really just the day-to-day activities that it takes to keep the wheels on everything. Washing the dishes or doing the laundry or just all those kind of mundane tasks that take up time. The fourth category is community, which is really focused on giving back to something larger than yourself with no expectation of return. Um, Community is such an important thing. The longest lived people in the world have very strong communities. And so I feel strongly about building a community with purpose. Then the fifth category is your fitness, because obviously a healthy mind stems from a healthy body, and you need to really create the space for yourself to do that. Um, so that's really the I guess the conceptual framework that I've developed all of this around. And then the system itself that I've come up with over the years consists of five different stages or parts. Stage one is getting aspirational, and this is really the stage where you set those big goals for yourself and you kind of craft a vision for your life and you plan how you get there. The second stage leans heavily on getting realistic then about the things that you want to accomplish, versus the things that you're already doing in your life. I found for years I would, set brand new goals. New Year's would roll around, you set some goals, set different goals at work, but there was never a process of subtracting things that you were already doing that maybe wasn't serving you. So you were never actually creating any time to fulfill that goal. And if you consider that everything you do is a task and all tasks take time, then obviously you need that time to complete these things. So the second stage, I call it getting realistic, and that's doing a pretty deep assessment of where your time is actually going and whether the places you're putting your time is actually serving the greater vision that you have for your life. So stage three is planning it all out. I'm a big proponent of time blocking, and so the book goes into detail about how to set up an effective time blocking system. I pair that with what I call the cascading planning system, which is just a series of different to-do lists, essentially, but with different time horizons. So you start with your goals in the year, you move to projects in the quarter, things that are due next month, this month, next week, this week, tomorrow, today. And as you go through your reviewing process, you migrate those goals down to the appropriate timeline as they get closer, which really just allows you to show up knowing exactly what you've got due. You show up prepared because you've been watching these things get closer, and you work on things that are due tomorrow. You work on them today. So that's kind of the nuts and bolts of how the system actually operates. And then the final stage is the review process. Setting up your calendar weekly, doing that annual review, the quarterly and the monthly reviews is such a powerful thing, because it really allows you to review backwards and then plan forwards using the lessons that you've taken over that time period. Quickly pivot if you find that maybe the goal you set wasn't the goal that you should have set, or that for whatever reason you're not making progress on it. You can reconsider that, maybe lower your standards a little bit. Maybe you don't if you're not writing 10 pages a day, maybe you should write 2 pages a day as your personal
Mhm.
goal,
Mhm.
or something of that nature. So
Mhm.
that's and I would say that that's a pretty broad overview of the contents of the book and the philosophy that underlies how it all came together.
I want to ask you some specific questions about some of the tools that you use. You mentioned time blocking and things like that. Before we do that, though, I want to try to apply the book to the nonprofit sector. So our listeners, our readers, our viewers, and specifically that stage of getting realistic, because a lot of nonprofit folks just say, I'm in the people pleasing business. I'm in the business of saying yes and helping people. And as a result, I only say yes and I never take anything off my plate and I feel overwhelmed. So, what do you say to that person? Because I'm sure you've run into that so many times.
Really, that entire step of the system was built on the back of my own personal overwhelm, just overcommitment, um, taking on too much. And obviously, these things, it depends on what stage you're at in your life and what's going on in these different categories of your life. When I was younger, um, I could put in a lot of work, and if you didn't have a young family, so you could focus more time in that particular area and say yes to more things. But then suddenly you say yes to having a family and having children, and now this is another major time commitment that you need to balance with the rest of your life. So as I was working through this process myself, um, and I'd come up with this kind of theory about the five main categories that you spend all of your time in. I listed each of these categories and I just started to write down every single thing that I had committed to in each of these, that based against the goals that I had set or the things I said that I would do. You know, I said I would get out and run a mile every day, but why wasn't I doing that? Because when I
Mhm.
when I started to break it down and consider everything else that was going on in my life, not just in the business, but in my personal life and in my volunteer work and my fitness practice and all these things, there just wasn't enough time to do it. So the end result of this exercise that I've created for myself was to evaluate each of those items that you put down against your goals that you've created, to make sure that there's alignment between both of these things. And if there is, then you keep it. And if there isn't, you extract yourself from it. And I've developed a bit of a process for that, because some things you can just stop, cold turkey, because it doesn't really affect anybody. It doesn't serve you, and you can walk away from it. Um, but other things are obligations that you've made to businesses or organizations or communities, um, require a bit of a more careful extraction to make sure that you don't burn your bridge, you don't damage your reputation by quitting something that you did say that you would do. And so I've got a little process in there for kind of a mindful way that you can do that as well. So I guess back to your question, as it relates to nonprofits and saying yes all the time, um, that's a good way to get a handle on where you are right now, and start to make a plan to maybe extract yourself from some of these commitments. But probably the biggest takeaway I guess I've learned on my productivity journey, um, and it's something I've really only come to the realization of recently, like, or a deep understanding. But you just have to get good at not getting everything done. You know, you write it on your to-do list, and you've got all these items, and it stays on your list tomorrow and the next day. Eventually, you've just got to take it off and be at peace with the fact that you're not going to get everything done. And so then this starts to help you become more mindful of the things that are truly important to you to get done, which ties all the way back to the first step, which is getting very clear on your goals and your expectations for yourself, and just the greater vision that you have for your life, and the person that you want to become.
Sean, before we let you go, real practical, what is your current calendar app of choice, to do list app of choice, and email app of choice?
Well, that it varies a little bit. For the productivity work, for my time blocking, I use Google Calendar exclusively, and then I pair that with the Google Tasks app as the task manager. I like to keep things inside the same architecture. Google obviously plays very well together, and I'm actually building out a small how-to course about how to use Google for time blocking. That's kind of some bolts and helps people set one up for themselves for the first time. Email again. I'm a big Outlook guy, and obviously in business, look at my personal business email. That's all run through Outlook. I love the tools. I love the apps. I'm on the road all the time, so you just really have to have,
Mhm.
strong, easy to use tools that syncs back and forth, so that when you get at your desktop, everything's up to date.
Makes good sense. Sean, thanks
So,
so much for sharing your expertise, your insights, and how can folks find out more about you and about the book?
well, I'm on Twitter at Sean P. Hogue. I show up there every day. I love the community that's there. It's really been kind of my primary source of, and I suppose, audience building and inspiration. We have a lot of great conversations. That's where we met, and I appreciate you reaching out there. And otherwise, you can go to my website, seanhogue.com. There's details of the book. I have a weekly newsletter that typically covers a science-backed productivity idea. I dig deep into the science. When I was doing my MBA, I got really good at research, so I love to go to right back to the first sources where all these ideas came from, and I share that with everybody else. And otherwise, you can get the book on Amazon as well. It's available there.
Hmm. As a fellow author friend of mine said, you don't have to read it, but you should buy it. But
Absolutely.
in this case, people should read it too. So, Sean, thanks so much for being our guest, and we'll talk to you real soon.
Really appreciate it, Mike. Thanks you.